Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Could you please take your seats? We'll be starting proceedings in 1 minute. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and on behalf of the Irish Parliament's European Union Affairs Committee, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Dublin and to Ireland. For those of you who arrived yesterday and had the pleasure of attending last night's event in the Royal Hospital in Kilmainham, I hope you had an enjoyable evening. Before we start this morning's proceedings, I do have to run a very short health and safety announcement, so I'd be grateful if you'd pay attention to it, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, may we please have your attention for this public safety announcement. In the event of an emergency, you will be asked to leave the building through the exit closest to you and proceed to the assembly point. Please take a moment to check the exit nearest you, bearing in mind that it may be behind you. Exit signs will remain illuminated at all times. Please ensure that mobile phones are switched to silent, and remember that this is a no-smoking building. If you are using headsets, we would request that you return them to where you found them when you have finished. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Can I start off by extending a particularly warm welcome to those chairmen who recently have joined the COSAC group for the first time, and they're attending here today in their new capacity. Mr. Joseph Horvat, who's the chairperson of the Committee on European Union Affairs from the Slovenian National Assembly. Mr. Michela Bordo, who's the president of the European Union Affairs Committee of the Italian Chamber of Deputies, and Mr. Vanino Chiti, who's the chairperson of the European Union Policies Committee from the Italian Senate. Also, Mr. Ovidiu Ioan Selaiki, who's the chairperson of the Committee on European Union Affairs from the Romanian Chamber of Deputies. Ms. Anca Daniela Boagiu, who's the chairperson of the European Union Affairs Committee of the Romanian Senate, and Dr. Christopher Fern, who's the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Foreign and European Affairs in the Maltese House of Representatives. You're all very welcome here today. Before we begin, can I advise you that today's proceedings are being broadcast live on TV and also on the internet. Colleagues, I'm delighted that we're joined today by the Speaker, the Ceann Comhairle of the Irish Parliament, Mr. Sean Barrett, TD. Ceann Comhairle, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Fellow parliamentarians, distinguished guests, I'd like to begin by welcoming you all to Dublin Castle for this, the 49th COSAC plenary meeting. As we come to the close of the Irish presidency, we are today celebrating the final in a series of 8 interparliamentary conferences. Ireland is also celebrating its 40th anniversary of membership of the European Union, and this is our 7th presidency during that period. Since my election to the Irish Parliament in 1981, I've had the pleasure of being directly involved in 3 of these presidencies, 2 as a government minister, and my 3rd as Ceann Comhairle, our Speaker of the Parliament. In relation to COSAC, next year it will be celebrating its 25th anniversary. In 1989, Mr. Laurent Fabius, Speaker of the French National Assembly, proposed the establishment of an interparliamentary body composed of members of national parliaments who had specialised in European affairs. One important reason for this initiative was the feeling in many national parliaments that they were losing contact with community policies following the introduction of direct elections to the European Parliament in 1979. Prior to direct elections, of course, national parliaments appointed members to the European Parliament. The idea behind Mr. Fabius' proposal was to increase the role of national parliaments in the European decision-making process, and his proposal was adopted by the Conference of Speakers in Madrid. Later in 1989, the first meeting of what is now COSAC was convened at the French National Assembly in Paris. It is worth noting that the agenda concentrated on an issue that is still valid today: how to increase parliamentary control on EU affairs. The main focus was on how to reinforce the national parliaments in EU affairs. The second COSAC conference was in fact held in Ireland, in Cork, on the 10th, 11th of May 1990, and a continued discussion on how to remedy the democratic deficit. Here we are today, beginning the 49th conference in Dublin. Only now we have 27 member states, with the 28th joining next month, that of course being Croatia. I'm also pleased that our relationship with the European Parliament has greatly strengthened and has added powers now enjoyed by the European Parliament have improved that democratic deficit. Having said all of this, there remains a common concern as parliamentarians that public trust in politics and institutions has been eroded at both EU and national levels on foot of the economic crisis. The recent Eurobarometer survey carried out in the 6 largest states, which suggested a widespread collapse and trust in the EU, is deeply worrying. Of course, in part this reflects the unpopularity of measures which were taken to address the crisis and the weaknesses of economic governance in Europe that were in part to blame for the crisis in the first place. We need to confront this crisis of confidence with a sense of urgency and with determination and a clear understanding of what is at stake. This risk of a significant and irreversible disconnect between citizens and decision-making in the EU is a serious one, which threatens to undermine stability, future growth and prosperity, and all that has been achieved in the European Union to date. There is no denying that the last few years have been extremely difficult for aspects of European governance, dealing with the currency crisis, debt crisis, bank crisis, and unemployment, particularly among our young citizens. Europe has come a long way in this short period of time, despite the trauma of the journey. The EU has been actively engaged in the adoption of proposals and measures designed to stabilise the situation and ensure that similar banking and sovereign debt crises are prevented in the future. Our economic architecture and the tools at our disposal are now markedly enhanced. It is worth recalling that we were being told on a daily basis that the euro would not survive, that there was a real possibility of a breakup of the Union. The sceptics had a field day. Well, here we are in 2013. We still have 27 member states, 28 next week, and others anxious to join. The euro is still around, has stabilised, and the euro area is looking forward to welcoming its 18th member. Banks are restructuring, debt has been brought under control, but still has a long way to go. I think a great deal of credit is due to the European leaders for these achievements. Concerns have been raised that the EU's overall response to the crisis has been driven by increased intergovernmentalism at the expense of the community method and parliamentarianism. These arguments resonate with us as parliamentarians, and I'm greatly encouraged by the debate that is now taking place at EU level and in the Member States on the need for greater democratic accountability and legitimacy in our Union. I commend the European institutions for placing this issue high on the agenda at this time. Of course, the immediate context of this discussion is the new framework of economic governance that has been developed in response to the crisis and to protect our common currency. Such measures as the European semester, the two-pack regulations on budgetary surveillance, and on banking supervision do raise questions regarding the accountability of the new system. This will even be more pronounced as further steps are taken towards closer economic and monetary integration, with the greater sharing of sovereignty which this implies. There is a broad consensus across Europe on the need to bolster democratic legitimacy and accountability in the EU. As the debate on the future shape of the European Union gains momentum, it is critical that this focus on democratic legitimacy and accountability is maintained and that we can see firm action. Parliaments being close to citizens clearly have a particularly important role to play in establishing links between citizens and European decision makers. I support the idea that parliaments should have the fullest role possible in policy formation, decision-making and oversight processes. The distinct role for national parliaments and the European Parliament are necessary. We need to ensure that existing tools at the disposal of parliaments are fully utilised and to consider where improvements might be necessary. I would respectfully suggest that national parliaments through COSAC should seek to have parliamentary time, perhaps on a monthly basis for 1 or 2 days, where European issues would be discussed across the EU. If this was to happen, proposals could emanate for action on particular matters of common concern. Communication is critical for the democratic process. I believe that one of the big issues to be dealt with is a communication deficit that exists between the European project and the European citizen. Too often, the only time people hear about the EU is in a negative sense, when new rules and regulations are being introduced, sometimes with the threat of fines or sanctions hanging over the member state. We need to be more open and communicate more openly with citizens about the benefits of the EU. There is a great deal that can be done in national parliaments in bringing greater focus on European issues on the floors of the respective houses. I appreciate the improvement that has occurred through the establishment of European Affairs Committees, but I believe that their work must be brought to the floors of parliaments during plenary sessions, and from there to the citizens through the media outlets, including, where possible, parliamentary TV channels, as well as through the use of the internet and social media. Despite the rise in the use of social media, TV is still the primary source where people get their information, and it's important we rise to the challenge of engaging with people through this medium. Here in Ireland, we are well advanced in the development of a parliamentary television channel, together with a user-friendly webcasting and online syndication. A parliamentary channel provides the public with the choice to watch the proceedings of their parliament when and where they choose. Rather than achieving prime-time viewership levels, the goal of the project is to allow the public choose when it views events in their parliament. We would hope that in the fullness of time that we will also be able to broadcast the proceedings of the European Parliament, again helping to bring the institutions of the European Union closer to our citizens. The saying that all politics are local is true, then we should try to ensure that European issues become local too. As you are all aware, Ireland is a programme country, and there's a huge focus on our economic situation internally. We're making a tremendous effort to exit the bailout programme later this year, but we can only achieve this with the understanding and support of our national parliamentarians and our citizens. We should also never forget, in our desire to achieve economic stability, that it was not the ordinary citizen that caused the problems in the first place, and that we cannot expect them to carry the can in total. When we are taking the necessary hard decisions, we should remember that those who should contribute the most are those who caused the problem in the first place. Fellow parliamentarians and guests, I wish you well in your deliberations today, and I look forward to hosting you this evening at a dinner in the Mansion House. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Ciaran Corla. Ladies and gentlemen, if you do wish to contribute to today's debate, can I ask you to please complete the appropriate request from the floor card, which is on your desk and also in the documentation pack that you received, and just pass that on to the Secretariat. Speaking time is going to be limited to 2 minutes per person, although I am willing to reduce that further to make sure that we allow the maximum number of contributors to get in. But during the first session with the Prime Minister, the Taoiseach, speaking time will be limited to 1 minute because that's a very short session on the agenda. And I hope that procedure is acceptable to everybody. Can I also appeal for any further amendments to the contribution and to the conclusions to be submitted by lunchtime of today to enable the Secretariat to process that in time for the Chairperson's meeting this evening. Moving on to today's agenda, the first point is the approval of the agenda of today's COSAC meeting. A draft agenda was sent to you all in January of this year and was approved at the COSAC Chairperson's meeting here in Dublin on the 28th of January, and the agenda is in your document pack and located on the document table outside. Our first session today will be an address by the Prime Minister of Ireland, the Taoiseach, Mr. Enda Kenny. Mr. Kenny will reflect on the achievements of the Irish presidency and the challenges which lie ahead for the European Union. As I said, the Taoiseach's time is limited to 45 minutes, so we're going to just ask for people to limit their questions, contributions to 1 minute each, please. Can I just ask people maybe just for a bit of quiet, please? I can hear a lot of feedback, and thank you. The next item on the agenda is a debate on the topic of the future of European integration. Now, you'll notice from your packs that we had asked Mr. Jacques Delors and Commissioner Viviane Reding to attend. Unfortunately, both of those had to pull out at very short notice, but we are glad that we will have Mr. Brendan Halligan, who's the chairperson of the Institute of International and European Affairs, joining us, as well as our colleague Mr. Herman de Croo, who many of you will know is a long-standing member of COSAC, and they'll be leading the debate. In a change to our usual format, I've asked Mr. Bill Cash from the House of Commons to respond to the speakers, and Mr. Cash will do that from the floor, following on from which we will have the usual debate, and I'm hoping that that will be a very stimulating debate. At lunchtime, I've facilitated a request from the Dutch Parliament for an informal session on selective EU scrutiny, and that will take place outside, and each and every delegate is welcome to attend that if you wish to do so. After lunch, the next item on the agenda is delivering on development, which will focus on what the European Union needs to do to implement its development policy in the coming years. And for this item, we've assembled a panel of speakers, including the respected philanthropist Dr. Mo Ibrahim, We've got MEP Ms. Michelle Striffler joining us, as well as Mr. Barry Andrews, who's the Chief Executive of GOAL, the aid organisation. Tomorrow, the first session will focus on a vision for an inclusive Europe, with a particular focus on marginalised youth. The keynote speaker will be Mr. Rory Quinn, who's the Irish Minister for Education, and there will be short interventions from 3 young Europeans representing marginalised groups, disabled, Roma and LGBT. And the final item on tomorrow's agenda will focus on EU enlargement and maintaining momentum in this area. And we've invited Mr. Valentin Inzko, who's the High Representative for Bosnia-Herzegovina, to join us to give us his insights into how the EU membership aspirations of Bosnia and other Balkan countries are progressing. The second speaker is Mr. Erwin Fure from the Centre for European Policy Studies, and he's also the former European Union Special Representative in the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, and more recently the OSCE Special Representative for the Transnistrian settlement process. And from the floor again, we will have Mr. Martinez from the European Parliament, who will be the first responder, after which we'll have our usual debate. So if nobody has any comments on the agenda, then I'll take it as being approved by the plenary session. We have one comment there from the European Parliament.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Chairman. There's a point I'd like to raise. On what you have planned for tomorrow. It says here that there will be 3 young European citizens. Now, at least for now, Turkey is not part of the European Union. I think, therefore, it's inappropriate that a Turkish citizen be considered a European citizen, at least formally speaking.
Thank you very much. Well, I suppose that's a matter for debate. Many of us would consider that Europe includes countries like Turkey, so we'll take that as your own personal opinion, which you're very welcome to, but I'm going to proceed with the agenda as outlined. We have Mr. De Croo.
I understand very well the observation of my friend Cassini, but the question is to see the opinion of... not Cassini, my goodness. I'm really sorry. I was keeping you much younger as I believe you was. Very well. Thank you. No, I think it is a good idea to have youngsters from outside the community to see what kind of look they have on our own situation. If they are against, in favor, full of aspiration, faith or nothing. And I believe it is a good choice by you forum to keep them speaking to us. Thank you.
Just very briefly to see that what Mr. Speroni has said is his personal view, as you very well. What Mr. Speroni has said is his personal view, which indeed I respect. And I mean, you see that the European Parliament, we are a plural institution by all means, but this does not represent the opinion of the delegation of the European Parliament, which is in full agreement, and we never contested the nationality of any of the young people that the presidency has found relevant and pertinent to invite them.
Okay, thank you.
Presidente,
Chairman, I did not want to question the right of a Turkish citizen to take the floor. It could be a Swiss or a Norwegian or a Chinese citizen. We've had comments and speeches, for example, from people from outside the European Union. For example, we've had people from Bosnia-Herzegovina. The only thing I was trying to state really is that a Turkish citizen today at least, is not a citizen of the European Union. It's just a formal point. Of course, his contribution is most welcome as such, but I don't think that someone from outside the European Union cannot be considered as a European citizen.
If we agree that the contributions will be from young Europeans, maybe as opposed to young European citizens. Okay, we'll move. Thank you very much for that. We'll move on from that. The next item on the agenda is the presentation of the 19th biannual report. And can I just start off by thanking the COSAC Secretariat for having compiled an excellent biannual report. And I'd now like to ask Libby Kurian, who's the permanent member of the COSAC Secretariat, to briefly present the report and its findings.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I welcome the opportunity to introduce the report. The 19th annual report, drafted to facilitate the exchange of information and better to inform the COSAC debate, contains 4 chapters. The report is based on information provided by you parliaments in response to the questionnaire from the Irish Presidency. Firstly, the report examines the topic of a genuine economic and monetary union. The report found that the majority of parliaments actively debate the key EMU documents, but that they feel these documents do not adequately address the subject of democratic legitimacy. Parliaments are concerned that democratic legitimacy should be deepened, and that the role and involvement of parliaments in the EU-level consideration of new economic measures should be strengthened. The chapter also examines Parliament's preparations for and scrutiny after European Council meetings, documenting much activity in this area at national level. On the European Semester 2013, the majority of parliaments have scrutinised the key documents and are satisfied with the degree of engagement of their parliaments on the economic governance of the EU and the European Semester. The report highlights best practice within parliaments that have adopted or plan to adopt new procedures to respond to the European Semester and includes documentation of their engagement with the Commission, for example. The report also examined the European Parliamentary Week organised by the European Parliament and, in advance of the Nicosia decision, took stock of opinions on Article 13 cooperation. On enlargement, the report documents that around 60% of the parliaments examine or debate monitoring reports and annual progress reports on enlargement countries or potential enlargement countries. Most debated enlargement in relation to all such countries, and around half debated the Commission's enlargement strategy. Many parliaments also engage in dialogue with political, official and civil societies in enlargement states. Finally, the report examines the mobilisation of interparliamentary cooperation in relation to scrutiny subsidiarity. It documents extensive activity in this field and looks particularly at the activity that surrounded the first yellow card on the so-called Monti II proposal. It highlights the methods of information exchange used, including that of IPEX and national parliament representatives and exchanges at COSAC. And in relation to this, a large number of parliaments called for improved responses to reasoned opinions from the European Commission in terms of timeliness and content. Thank you.
For your presentation, can I ask for any comments from the floor at this stage? Okay, if nobody has any comments, then we'll move on to the next point on the agenda. The presidential troika met yesterday where we discussed the issue of financing of the COSAC Secretariat and the position of the permanent member. The present arrangement for the co-financing of the permanent member of the Secretariat and the costs of running the office and the website all end at the end of this year. Now, we've received letters of intent from 22 national parliaments in relation to the commitment to finance that post-2013. Can I ask the parliaments who haven't yet responded to renew their commitment for co-financing? The term in office of the permanent member also expires at the end of this year. The appointment of the new permanent member of the Secretariat will take place during the 50th COSAC, which will be a matter for the Lithuanian presidency to progress, and I understand that they are already starting that process. I also understand that the current incumbent, Libby Kurian, will not be seeking reappointment to the post. So on behalf of everybody here, I'd like to express our thanks, Libby, for your work over the last number of years. And I'm sure you'll all join me in wishing Libby the best for the future. Now, if anybody has comments at this stage, otherwise we'll move on. Okay. The next item on the agenda is the outcome of an informal meeting of EU committee chairs which took place in Copenhagen in March. At the chairperson's meeting in January, we discussed the forthcoming informal meeting in Copenhagen, and we also discussed the forthcoming chairs meeting in Cyprus, which also took place in March. And we agreed at the chairperson's meeting here in Dublin in January that we would have short feedback from both of those meetings today at the COSAC plenary. Our Danish colleague, Ms. Eva Kjær Hansen, who arranged and hosted the informal meeting in Copenhagen, has asked me to respond today because she's on her way to Dublin but hasn't arrived here yet. But at the meeting in Copenhagen in March, participants from across a number of European Union countries expressed their role and emphasised how national parliaments should be considered to play a special role in relation to the European decision-making process. Concern was expressed by many about the lack of proposals about how the role of national parliaments could be strengthened in the evolving economic governance of the European Union. We heard from Professor Mark Hallerberg from the Hertie School of Governance in Berlin regarding the extent of involvement of national parliaments in the European semester to date. Participants discussed the tools available to parliamentarians to ensure appropriate engagement and oversight during the European semester process. An exchange of views was held on how the political dialogue with the European Commission might be strengthened, and also the chairpersons shared views on how the conference envisaged under Article 13 of the Stability Treaty might operate. Of the members who attended in Copenhagen, 16 of them subsequently wrote to the Speaker of the House of Representatives of Cyprus to inform them of our deliberations, and that was in advance of the Speakers' Conference in April. And they requested that existing structures and resources should be used to their full potential. And finally, participants also discussed how clusters of parliaments might engage in reinforced interparliamentary cooperation on issues of common concern to a number of them, and how through COSAC continuity of cooperation between national parliaments could be improved. And as I said, we fed them on to the Speakers' Conference in Cyprus. Now, at the Speakers' Conference in Cyprus, Avrof Neophytou, who a former chair, the previous chair of COSAC, was in attendance, and Avrof is going to report back this morning on the outcome of the Speakers' Conference. Avrof, the floor is yours.
Chairman, I would like to thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to inform you on the outcome of the Conference of Speakers that took place on the 21st to 23rd of April in Nicosia. Let me begin by informing you on Article 13 of the Treaty on Stability, Coordination and Governance in the context of Economic and Monetary Union. In the informal discussions that took place, the speakers emphasized the need to strengthen legitimacy and accountability with regard to economic governance of EMU, and in particular regarding the Economic and Monetary Union by emphasizing the need for national parliaments to have an enhanced role in this process. So on the basis of Article 13, and in this context, the speakers decided to set up an inter-parliamentary conference that would consist of representatives of national parliaments, including partner countries and the European Parliament, and in particular members of the committees in question, based on the formula, the existing formula on the economic security and defense policy, and this would replace the meetings taking place, the meetings between speakers taking place during each presidency. And each member state will decide on this. The speakers proposed that we should meet twice a year, this conference should meet twice a year, and they should coordinate with the European semester circle. During the first 6 months, the meeting would be held in Brussels each year, and they would be co-chaired and co-organized together with the European Parliament and the European Parliament of the country holding the EU presidency. For the second semester of each year, the meeting would take place in the country holding the presidency of the EU. The first unit of this conference, in the first section, we discussed the roles of national parliaments and that of the European Parliament in strengthening democracy and human rights in third countries by emphasizing particularly the Mediterranean. The speakers encouraged national parliaments and the European Parliament to contribute substantially to the democratic process and democratic change in the Mediterranean by promoting exchanges, by offering know-how, technical assistance, education, training, and supporting electoral procedures in those countries while respecting the principles of transparency and equal and fair representation. In the second unit of our discussions, as regards relations between citizens and the EU, the speakers agreed that the ongoing financial crisis in member states of the EU makes it necessary for us to strengthen accountability and democratic legitimacy in the decision-making process at EU level with more participation by citizens. The speakers proposed that national parliaments should make the best possible use of audiovisual tools available to them and social networking means for exchanging information and opinions with citizens as well. And the final section of our discussions talked about the roles of parliaments with regard to social cohesion at times of austerity. The speakers emphasized the need for greater involvement of national parliaments in developing a framework for reforms, economic and social reforms, while recognizing the process of the European semester as a useful tool that could contribute to improving policy coordination at EU level on macroeconomic and structural issues in particular. They indicated that there is a need for the involvement of parliaments when developing stability and convergence programs and with regard to structural reform programs before they're submitted to the Commission. They emphasized the need for democratic accountability and monitoring at the decision-making process, including decisions at ECAS level. Thank you very much, dear colleagues, for your attention.
Thank you very much, Avarov. Now, can I invite comments from the floor? The first comment will be our Belgian representative, Mr. Herman de Croo.
Wel bedankt, meneer de voorzitter.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
De vergadering van voorzitters van parlementen is natuurlijk nuttig.
The meeting of chairmen is obviously extremely useful meeting, and over the past 8 years I've had the opportunity to lead the Belgian chamber. But the meeting is a difficult one because the statutes of the presidents of parliament differ greatly. In some countries, it is almost purely a political function, whereas in other countries, it is a markedly neutral function. So I understand very well that the proposal to replace this from a European perspective is, well, I think it's understandable that there would be 2 meetings per year. Now, but I think it would be useful if we don't keep changing it. We need to expand it, and I think it's important that we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, because you might lose the baby. Now, the European Parliament has very interesting meetings at least twice a year where they meet with national parliamentarians. And we need a light structure. I think our colleague from Denmark made a very interesting point and question that we set up an open structure, but make sure that we don't really be buried under all of these various structures and forums. So I would urge caution, and coordination is key as well.
Our French colleague.
Oui, je voudrais...
What I'd like to say, and I think this is a common position from the left and the right, what the President of the European Committee of the National Assembly in France were in favour of this interparliamentary meeting, as our Cypriot colleague has so rightly said. This was included in Article 13 of the treaty. So we are very much in favour of it. Partly for our own reasons, because it's essential to have a debating chamber where we can discuss these issues of the European economy. And I think it's high time to have an interparliamentary structure involving national parliaments and the European Parliament. But also, this is useful for external reasons. In our relations with our fellow citizens, increasingly national parliaments are insufficiently involved in European affairs. So it's crucial that we do set up this structure. National parliaments are not involved enough to be able to pass on the European message to the citizens in their countries. And I'm thinking of the European elections just around the corner in 2014. It's crucial that national parliaments can relay back to the grassroots what's going on. Obviously, the MEPs do this, but we have a very low turnout at European elections unless national parliaments can get involved in this discussion right away. We don't want to see a low turnout, and we don't want populist or extremist parties to win the European elections either. There's currently a movement afoot which means that people are turning away from the European Union, they're losing interest, or we see a rise in populist movements, extremist movements, and I think COSAC should address all national parliaments and say, we're really counting on you to go out spreading the word about the European Parliament. I think such an initiative would be very valuable for our fellow citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deputy Bernard Durkin from the Irish Parliament.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that this is the most important subject for discussion, how to marry the interests and views of the national parliamentarians with the European parliamentarians, and given that we are working against the background of enhanced powers for both. I think our French colleague has made a very important intervention. I think it is important that from here on, we all, each in our respective roles in the European Parliament and in the national parliaments, take account of the effect that each of our contributions will have to the sum total of what becomes European policy and European attitudes. That is particularly important at this time, when there is an element of distrust towards all institutions, towards national parliamentarians, towards European parliamentarians and European institutions. And it is there, I believe, that we need now, as national parliamentarians and as members of the various European institutions, to have a common approach, a coordinated approach that will take account of the views and the interests and concerns of each other's respective territories. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gediminas Kirkalis from the Lithuanian Parliament.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear colleagues, first of all, my sincere congratulations and compliments to Ireland for the successful presidency. Many thanks for the splendid dinner and music last night. Lithuania is ready to take over presidency of the European Union Council in just 1 week's time. I'd like to take opportunity and tell you a few words about our plans, especially as concerns our outcome of Speakers' Conference in Nicosia last April. The Lithuanian Seimas intends to hold 9 parliamentary dimension events in the second semester of 2013. One of them will be inauguration session of the newly established conference foreseen in Article 13 of the Treaty on Stability, Coordination and Governance in the Economics and Monetary Union. We plan to hold the conference on 16-18 October 2013 in the Seimas in Vilnius. For the sake of clarity, we suggest calling it the Parliamentary Conference on Economic and Financial Governance in the European Union. As foreseen as the conclusion of the Speakers' Conference in Nicosia, we will invite members of relevant committees of all nation parliaments, the European Parliament and the parliaments of candidate countries. The composition and size of each delegation rests upon each parliament. However, it needs to be cost-effective and should offer a possibility of an in-depth parliamentary debate. We suggest that the debate focuses on the future of economic and monetary union and the role of parliaments in ensuring democratic legitimacy and accountability of the process. Among others, we suggest debating the purpose and the vision of the conference, the framework for the post-crisis economic governance in the European Union, banking union and financial integration, budgetary consolidation and structural reforms in Europe. For this purpose, we have already secured the participation of the Vice President of the European Commission, Mr. Olli Rehn. We also intend to invite a number of prominent speakers from national parliaments, the European Parliament, and other experts in the field. The President of Lithuania, Mrs. Dalia Grybauskaitė, has also agreed to be our special guest at the conference. Let me take this opportunity to invite you, dear colleagues, to participate in the inaugural session of the new conference in Vilnius. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our Greek colleague.
I would like to thank you for your hospitality here in Ireland. Let me point out that based on the Greek Parliament's experience and based on what I've seen so far, it seems that we have not become aware of the role that national parliaments could play in the EU integration process. The competences that we have as parliamentarians in order to monitor the implementation of subsidiarity principle and the proportionality principle in the context of the EU's operation, our competences are considerable in this context. And I believe that we have not seriously exercised our full range of powers and competences So I'm talking about national parliaments. It seems that there's no real cooperation among national parliaments that would make it possible for us to ensure the required majority that would show a yellow card or an orange card that would be required for us to block an initiative by the European Commission if we consider it necessary. Another thing we should realize is that our role is and could become very important in the context of economic governance as well, because once again, in this area, we see a considerable democratic deficit. So I believe that these meetings provide us with an opportunity to restore, to bring back a serious functioning of the committees, the European Affairs Committees of national parliaments, so that we can exercise our rights together in cooperation and ensure the required majority. I noticed today that when political groups meet, participation is minimal. This proves that political groups themselves are not entirely serious about the role national parliaments could play in this effort, in an effort to exercise our competences in the EU system as a whole. So I believe that this is a great opportunity for us. As we're all here today, we could try to cooperate and coordinate our actions so that we can really play the part of people's representatives. Let me point out that every single day, to a large extent, national parliaments do act on behalf of EU integration, given that 60% of legislation we're implementing is EU legislation, in essence. So I believe that we should all think about those issues. And one final comment. We need to think about the role the Troika has in certain member states, because the Troika intervenes in many ways, and very often they seem to go against the EU treaties themselves. So national parliaments, and this body in particular, should monitor the Troika's role in the context of EU governance. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that contribution. I think that concludes the contributions from the floor, so thank you very much for them, and we'll move on. We're now going to play a video from Commissioner Viviane Reding, who, as I said earlier, was invited at today's events, but unfortunately could not be here. So she has sent a video to us, which hopefully will help to inform the debate that we're about to have this morning. So could we roll the video, please? Thank you.
Chairman, honourable members of the Parliament, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very sorry for not being able to attend the meeting and convey to you personally my greetings and the greetings of the European Commission. I am, however, grateful to Chairman Dominic Hannigan for hosting COSAC in Dublin and for the debate with national parliaments on the future of Europe. It's at a defining moment. The European Union has taken concrete steps to firmly reinforce the single market. The European Union is also building a structure to secure the stability of the common currency for the European Union, the euro, which is a strong currency and the world's second most important currency, making up 25% of the world's foreign exchange reserves. We have also taken bold steps to improve the joint governance of our economies, as economic decisions taken in one member state affect its neighbours and the whole union. The simple truth is that our economies are not islands. We must remain firm in our efforts. Within the next months and years, further decisions must be taken. In my view, these changes are impossible without a European debate about democracy, legitimacy and the future of Europe. Integration and legitimacy must advance in parallel. More democracy is a corollary of greater institutional integration, which the European Union needs to stand up to current global challenges and to provide the best outlook to its more than 500 million citizens. To that end, we need to be convincing in explaining this to the citizens of Europe, and we need to make sure that their voice is heard and truly counts. business as usual is simply not an option. It is also not an option because we operate in a new environment. The Lisbon Treaty has given a clear and concrete role to national parliaments, as well as an enhanced role of the European Parliament as political actor. The national parliaments play specific roles in reviewing the compliance of Commission proposals with the principles of subsidiarity and proportionality. The European Council meetings and the European Semester of Economic Coordination also have the effect of confronting national parliaments with decisions taken at the EU level, forcing them to be involved early on in the policy-making cycle. As for the European Parliament, it now decides on a vast majority of EU legislation and has power over the entire EU budget on an equal footing with the Council of Ministers, representing the governments of the member states. The treaty also gives additional responsibility to the European Parliament as representatives of the Union's citizens. It elects the President of the Commission on the basis of a proposal by the European Council, taking into account the results of the European elections. In short, the next Commission has to reflect the outcome of the 2014 European Parliament elections, as it will be the first under the new Lisbon rules. The 2014 elections should therefore be about European issues, about European choices and programs, and not a referendum on local or national matters. Excellencies, colleagues, we are moving from crisis management to democratic, transparent, efficient decision-making. If we want to preserve and strengthen Europe's position as the biggest economy of the world and the most convincing peace project, I am absolutely convinced that we need to further build our union based on a strong vision. Upon mature reflection, I think that the term United States of Europe would best reflect the ultimate destination of the European Union. United States of Europe. The plural is a clear expression of the fact that we are not aiming at a unitary state or a superstate, but at a federal entity in which individual states agree to a new kind of association and where the diversity and individuality of each state is consciously preserved. But also United States of Europe, which makes it clear that although we are aiming for a federal constitution similar to the one of the United States of America, we intend to do so in the specific context of European history, of our values, and of the unique diversity of our continent. Yes, one day perhaps we should have a directly elected president of the European Commission in order to ensure that powers and competences at European level go hand in hand with stronger democratic legitimacy and accountability. The European Year of Citizens 2013 is a unique opportunity to have a debate with citizens on the different possible visions for the future of Europe, the one which I personally stand for, and other possible developments. It would be good if you, the chairs of the European Affairs Committees of the national parliaments, could hold debates on European matters with the citizens in your countries. I have done this in many countries across the Union. It is important to listen to the citizen, to respond to their concerns, their fears, and their dreams. It is essential to make them understand that their voice counts and that their elected representatives care. I hope you accept the challenge, and I look forward to hearing from you about your experiences with the citizens in your constituency. I wish you a very productive discussion on the future of Europe, and I hope that together we can show the way for a common shared space where more than 500 million citizens feel at home. Thank you.
Well, an interesting contribution there, and no doubt it will be food for thought for our deliberations later on this morning when we talk about the future of Europe. But colleagues, I'm delighted now to announce that the Prime Minister, the Taoiseach of Ireland, has arrived, and the Taoiseach will be informing us of progress to date in relation to the Irish presidency and also the challenges that lie ahead for Europe as we move through this crisis. So can you put your hands together, please, to welcome and Taoiseach Mr. Enda Kenny. Thank you. Now, Taoiseach, you're very welcome to Dublin here this morning. Thank you very much for joining us. We've been listening to Commissioner Viviane Reding outline her thoughts on the future of Europe and what needs to happen in relation to further European Union integration. And we're looking forward to hearing from you as to progress to date with the Irish presidency, what's been achieved, the challenges that you've faced, and also your thoughts on what's going to happen next. So whenever you're ready, we'd be delighted to hear your contribution. Thank you.
It is. Welcome to Dublin. Fáilte mór gachtain and sugar block clia.
You're almost welcome to Dublin. I've been speaking Irish the whole time. I won't speak a word of English.
Welcome to Dublin, Dublin Castle. I'm sure many of you have been here before. Concorla, COSAC Chairman, members of the European Affairs Committee, distinguished parliamentary colleagues, let me first of all welcome you all back to Dublin here for the 4th time since your foundation, which is at a time when Ireland is actually celebrating 40 years of membership of the European Union and in the closing days of our 7th EU presidency. I understand that the first COSAC meeting to take place in Ireland was back in 1990 in the city of Cork, which was then hosted by a distinguished former Foreign Minister, Peter Barry. That was the second meeting in almost 25 years of COSAC's important engagement with the European process. The agenda of that particular meeting focused on the perceived democratic deficit and on the question of subsidiarity, issues that remain at the heart of the debate. COSAC has always played a central role in the important issues on the European Union agenda. In 1996, in County Tipperary and in Dublin, COSAC made its contribution to what would become the Treaty of Amsterdam. In 2004, during Ireland's last presidency, COSAC provided a valuable impetus to negotiations which would eventually lead to the Treaty of Lisbon. And each of these key institutional steps, as you know, brought progress in terms of democratic legitimacy and democratic accountability, including an enhanced role for national parliaments. Each of these steps brought the European project, or the European process, to a new stage in its development. I believe, as I should, that the issue of democratic legitimacy has always to be centre stage. It is a key pillar of President Van Rompuy's current work on the next steps for economic and monetary union, and one which the Irish presidency has worked hard during our presidency to advance. The presidency also takes place in the European Year of the Citizens, and clearly politics, first and last, is about people. We have to ensure that citizens are aware of the many rights that they enjoy from their membership of the European Union, from the 4 freedoms to more specific rights such as those for consumers. I actually see this year, in broader terms, however, our citizens have every right to know that their union, its institutions, its member state governments and its national parliaments are working with a particular priority focus, and to do so day and night, on the priority for recovery and jobs through concrete actions and decisions. Can any leader in Europe be happy with a situation where 26 million people are unemployed? Can any politician stand up and say, we have done a first-class job with that scale of unemployment affecting all countries right across the Union. This is the agenda of the government here as we work for recovery in Ireland. It's also been at the heart of the agenda of our presidency as we work for recovery in Europe as a whole. I know that these group of parliamentarians here share these goals. Your discussions today and tomorrow reflect the same priorities, with a welcome focus clearly on building a future for young people in particular. And when we consider the future of Europe, we have to focus centrally on their futures. What we have in common as parliamentarians is that we are elected by our peoples, and therefore we are answerable to them. That is why the work of COSAC on accountability is so important. Sharing best practice approaches to parliamentary scrutiny helps ensure that the EU decision-making process is kept as close to the citizen and to their needs as can be. We know that the people that we have the honour to represent and whom we are elected by have to see evidence of what is being done on their behalf in respect of jobs and growth. Which is why when you have an absence of stability, an absence of jobs, and indeed an absence of truth, it's very difficult to make things work. And that's why, for me as a practicing politician like yourselves, it's very important that the citizens of Europe actually be able to see that the decisions are made by European leaders are actually to follow through into reality. And that's why questions like banking union and all of these things are so important, that people can see that when leaders make decisions, they follow them through to reality. So let me share with you a few moments this morning in respect of the progress made during this presidency by Ireland, so that when you go back to your own countries and your own people, and you're being asked what have Europe done in the last few months, you can point out a series of concrete decisions that have been taken during the course of the Irish presidency. Amongst our achievements that we're pleased to have made is our contribution to stability, which is being secured through banking union decisions, better supervision, stronger capital requirements, with limits on bankers' bonuses. Through our work, we have ensured that banks are better regulated and that they do what they are supposed to do, acting as agents for sustainable investment and growth and jobs. That stability is also being secured through better coordination of our budgets, so that they too are sustainable and that they are targeted at growth and on jobs. And for delivery on that growth and jobs, the EU's biggest investment tool by far, which is the 2014-2020 budget on MFF, was agreed by the EU heads of state and government. We are working with the European Parliament to ensure that the €960 billion in there can be released to fund investment and to growth across areas from cohesion to research to education and to food producers. Clearly, jobs and growth for young people will be given a central focus here, which will be front-loaded, with a special fund to combat youth unemployment of €6 billion, and that's dedicated to fighting unemployment, particularly in the regions that have been hardest hit by the crisis. That fund will underpin the youth guarantee that was agreed under this presidency last February, and we want to work now to see that it's released quickly and indeed front-loaded. Little point in having money available for countries with serious youth unemployment problems and say we have it but you can't have access to it until 2020. If you have it, you need to be able to have your effective programs in place that will make a difference. Policy agenda that we've followed has been geared to help get young people back into work. We've advanced a range of measures to support our small and medium enterprises and to boost Europe's digital sector, both employers and significant employers of young people. I'd have to say that to jumpstart this growth and jobs area, there have been a number of historic steps forward in quite a few bilateral trade negotiations which together could seriously boost growth and add jobs here in Europe. Now, you are aware that the EU-Japan negotiations have been launched. I discussed them with Prime Minister Abe here in Dublin last week. That actually was the first time that a Japanese Prime Minister actually ever visited this country since independence way back in 1922. The EU-Canada negotiations continue. I discussed these with Prime Minister Harper when he was here just for the occasion of the G8. There are still some matters that need to be resolved there. I do hope we can come to a conclusion fairly quickly. And of course, one of our priorities was to secure the mandate during this presidency so that we'd have a negotiating authority for the EU-US Trade and Investment Partnership, which is a mandate that followed the launch of the negotiations at the G8 summit in County Fermanagh here in Ireland just a few weeks ago. And I was very glad to see the response from the EU and the US here to open these negotiations formally in Washington in July. Such trade agreements clearly have a serious impact and potential for export and investment and jobs for Europe and the US. Agreement alone could mean annual benefits of about 150 billion for both economies, and that affects people in your own countries. If you add to these the new EU programmes supported by the EU budget, from Horizon 2020 research programme to the Common Agricultural Policy and the Erasmus for All programme. Now, I expect Horizon 2020 to be concluded this week. I hope that can be finalised. One or two little issues there. Discussions are going on as we meet here in Dublin on the CAP. I hope that can be dealt with this week also. And Erasmus for All is a very important programme. So if you add to these an agreed range of measures that were signed off on in justice and home affairs, in consumer policy, in employee safety, there is a great deal to tell our people about in terms of progress. And beyond the Union's borders, work has continued in terms of enlargement and with our neighbours, and I know that you will discuss that tomorrow in your deliberations here. Further afield, we have recorded significant progress in the post-2015 Global Development Framework, while direct action has been taken on a number of fronts, including a resumption of aid to Mali and the people who have been afflicted there. So there is progress in Europe, there is progress in Ireland. This government was elected back in March of 2011 with a mandate to take the decisions necessary to secure recovery, including an end to our EU-IMF programme, which we intend to exit later this year. We've engaged constructively with our European and global partners from the very beginning, working together for arrangements which make our debt more sustainable. At home, we've had to make very tough decisions, coupled with positive initiatives for growth and jobs. Having first secured stability, we're now making steady progress, recording the first increases in employment in a number of years and starting to record economic growth. Challenges remain, as they do for us all, and occasions like this give us a chance to engage and talk about what's happening in your different countries, the state of play and ideas that seem to work better for legislators and for public representatives in the different countries. So there's some of the issues in relation to our presidency. We've got to put in place the architecture now to prevent future crisis and to plan for future growth. President Van Rompuy, and what he calls the 4 keys to unlock recovery, he stressed the urgent need to progress the EMU on a number of fronts. On financial stability, the important steps taken by the ECB under President Draghi and the commitments made at the European Council last June mean a period of relative calm continues. That doesn't mean that there's any room for complacency or any time to be lost in moving on here. So we're very clear, arising from the decision of the 29th of June last year, to break the link between sovereign debt and bank debt. And banking union, therefore, is absolutely crucial and critical to this. Economic resilience can only be improved through sound public finances and improved competitiveness. Economic and monetary union has to be strengthened. This includes delivering on banking union, but of course strengthening EMU is more than just about banking. In our presidency, we have supported President Van Rompuy in his consultations on economic policy coordination, on competitiveness and on solidarity, and of course on the social dimension of what he says. All of this needs more work. All of this needs more time. It is an ambitious agenda, and we need to be very clear about the direction that we have plotted for ourselves for the future. Of course, there is the fundamental question of democratic legitimacy and accountability, which is where you and COSAC have an important contribution to make. The European Council has recognised that stronger economic governance arrangements need to be supported by stronger democratic legitimacy and by clearer public accountability. I think we all stand for that. Early in our presidency, Ministers for European Affairs discussed this very issue here in Dublin. Ministers strongly supported greater efforts to strengthen the links between citizens and decisions taken at European level, and they also clearly recognised the need to respect, and I mean to respect, the role of national parliaments in all of this. We can agree on these things, but what is needed now are the concrete steps to deliver and follow through on those outcomes. Your discussions this week are a valuable input, if I might say, into that debate and to the work currently continuing with President Van Rompuy. Let me finish here with a positive message for you. I happen to be very optimistic about the future of Europe. We still have much to do, and growth in the immediate term remains elusive for most. But the last year and the most important measures agreed by the European Union since January add up to the major building blocks for securing stability and for stabilising the growth and the jobs that we all need. I'd like to take this opportunity to record my thanks to the representatives of the many member states and the EU institutions here for this excellent legislative partnership which we have enjoyed as presidency. When you look ahead the next 20 years and you see the impact of China and Japan and India and the movement of the phenomenal populations in the Far East, Africa, in the next 20 years, economically and population-wise, will be a very different continent. And clearly, the moves now being made by the United States, particularly in terms of energy, will mean that the geopolitics of the Middle East and the Far East will change as a consequence of the US becoming an independent energy exporting country. And that means that we also recognise that 90% of the world's trade will be conducted outside the borders of the European Union in the next decade, which means that the trading connections that we have with the Far East, with Japan, with Canada, with the US, also the requirement to get our own houses in order here, mean that Europe and the United States, as the two greatest trading blocs on the planet, can set standards for global trade for the period ahead. This is a challenging position for all our countries. It's also a position of great excitement. And as a believer in politics, I like to see that the decisions being made by the Council are followed through. Thank you all for your cooperation during our presidency. We still have a deal to do this week with a number of very important meetings, and hopefully we can conclude the MFF by the European Council meeting on Thursday, Friday. Hope you enjoy your stay in Dublin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Taoiseach, for your presentation here this morning. Now, we have a lot of people indicating that they'd like to ask questions, and we have limited time, so I'm going to try to get through as many people as possible, but I do need your help. If you do want to put questions down, please submit them to the Secretariat and they'll come up here. But we have quite a number already in. I'm going to ask people to limit their contributions to 1 minute so that as many people as possible can get in. I will take a response from the Taoiseach after every 5 questions. So the first questioner is from Italy, Mr. Paolo Tancredi.
Grazie Presidente, condivido.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I share the Taoiseach's optimism but perhaps there's a bit of a clash with the title of the session. We need to do more to work towards government of the Union. The most recent decisions have only been partially implemented in an asymmetrical way. We have the two-pack and measures taken to strengthen and stabilize public finances. However, we're working very slowly on moving towards banking union and a framework to coordinate economic policies because of resistance from certain member states. Just a few weeks ago, there was a compromise on the creation of EU supervision.
Can you very, very quickly make your point, and then I'll move on very quickly.
Problema posto. Vabbè, comunque la questione è chiara, cioè c'è la simmetria sulla stabilità, si fa tutto subito, sul resto. No, forse dovevamo dire qualcosa sulla vigilanza.
Okay, we'll move on to the second speaker, Mr. Antonio Rodrigues from Portugal, and you have 1 minute.
Muito obrigado, Sr. Presidente, caros colegas, Sr. Primeiro-Ministro.
Thank you, Chairman, colleagues. Taoiseach. First of all, the example that Ireland has provided when it comes to cooperation and really trust has been fantastic. Over the last few years, Europe has had a series of positive examples. A crisis is not the end of the road. The situation in Europe is not perfect. We need more growth. We need to be more efficient and efficiency and so on, especially during an economic crisis. But there was also a crisis in trust, and that is a key issue in European development. We know that there's an understanding between national parliaments and the European Parliament. There's also a question of personal trust. We see that people are turning their backs on Europe, and we need to be very careful. We need the support of people. My second comment, solidarity. One for all and all for one. Chair, thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is from Slovenia, Mr. Joseph Horvat.
Thank you. Taoiseach, Chair, colleagues. After the onset of the economic and financial crisis in Europe, most of the measures taken at the national European level were mainly adopted to put out the fire, if I can say so. And the banking union was such an instrument. But the fact is that in the future, we will have similar crises. So I would like to know whether the Irish presidency thinks that all the implementing steps for the banking union are going in the right direction, because it is focusing mainly on private capital to finance the restructuring costs for banks in the future. So it is not clear at this stage whether we will get this money from the financial transaction tax or some other form of financial participation. I am personally convinced that in the end, the consumers will foot the bill, our citizens. I'm asking this because I'm not entirely convinced whether the banking union contains all the instruments necessary to implement this properly, despite all the pressures. Thank you.
The next speaker is from Hungary, Mr. Richard Korsak.
Thank you, the floor, Mr. Chairman. Dear Mr. Prime Minister, first of all, let me congratulate for the successful Irish presidency. As far as the economic monetary union is concerned, as you mentioned, let me reaffirm that Hungary is interested in a strong and viable Eurozone. It is quite evident that a new quality of the Eurozone has been taking shape due to the decision to reinforce the economic and monetary union. Mr. Prime Minister, we think that for the non-Eurozone countries, the possibility to get involved on equal terms into the practical creation of a banking union is really, really important. Hungary has constructively contributed to the debate so far, and encouragingly some of our ideas are already incorporated into the drafts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Gediminas Kirkalis from Lithuania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Taoiseach, for the very, very interesting and useful speech. And I believe that our cooperation in Troika with your country very successful. We are taking over this presidency and believe that we will cooperate in the future also successfully. Prime Minister, please say, do you know, of course, that in Lithuania have to be create new parliamentary body on the so-called Article 13. Can you shortly to what is your expectation on this body and probably content of discussions there? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Taoiseach.
I'm glad you share the optimism that we have for the union here. Banking union is clearly critical to all of this. As I said, I'd like to see that where decisions are made by the European Council, the elected leaders and heads of government, that they're actually followed through. Important decisions have been made there. The presidency has made good progress, and it's very important that we conclude this job. The 29th of June last year, the decision was made, and that decision needs to be followed through to be fully in place. That decision was to break the link between sovereign debt and bank debt with the possibility of recapitalisation under the ESM. We have the single supervisory mechanism put in place. Now we need to move on to banking resolution and recovery. This is actually under discussion last weekend and again this week. Very difficult and very complex. It's going to come again on Wednesday, and we can hope that we can conclude that. Respective question number 2 was about trust and solidarity. I actually believe this is fundamental. You cannot engage at political level unless there's a sense of trust and understanding. But the makeup of the European Union can actually be quite complex here. In the course of a presidency, you might be dealing with 3 or 4 different new prime ministers, and every minister down the line dealing with the respective areas in finance or whatever, energy or whatever it might be, because of changes in government and elections that take place in different countries, and that obviously creates a problem. But this is the year of the citizen. It is about having an ongoing dialogue. But I have to say that I sat at the European Council meetings in the first period of this government, and clearly there were decisions being made that people did not believe in, and neither did the markets. So it is a case of unfolding all the layers to know exactly what the nature and scale of the problem is, and then follow through on it. Where's the money for banking union going to come from? Well, the 29th of June decided to break that link between sovereign and bank debt, that you shouldn't have a situation where the taxpayer, as happened in this country, became the place of first resort to have to bail out the banks. And I'm glad that a hierarchy is now being put in place for bail-ins, which will deal with that, and hopefully that for the future, that with the tools and the mechanisms that are now in place, what happened here won't happen elsewhere. Clearly, given the circumstances that applied, the citizens here had to borrow 64 billion and were required as a consequence to pay for it. Now we've had assistance from our European colleagues in terms of an agreement with the ECB, extension of maturity dates for loans, reductions in interest rates. We still have the issue of the train wreck economically that occurred a number of years ago, and that's why banking union is of such importance in terms of where we're headed. The question from Hungary, I agree with this. The non-Eurozone meeting should be included. We have supported that, and as presidency, we were involved in seeing that was moved forward. In respect of Lithuania, well, good luck to you with your presidency. I hope that we'll have a number of the other matters cleared away for you by the time you take it over. The views on the new Article 13 conference, what are our expectations for this? I think it's a good idea. We will support the interparliamentary conference here, which is on stability and trust. I think that These are fundamental. We can't make progress unless we have these things.
Thank you very much, Taoiseach. The next questioner is Ms. Anna Burchill from Romania.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Felicităm președinția irlandeză pentru succesele.
We would like to congratulate the Irish presidency for a very successful presidency, and we appreciate the alignment with the European Commission on the multi-annual financial framework. We regret the political pressure exerted by the media in certain member states on its own citizens, but also on Romania and Bulgaria on a supposed wave of immigrants after 2014. And we would like to express the hope that the member states where these media campaigns take place will meet the commitments they took in accordance with the treaties. As for Romania and Bulgaria's accession to the Schengen area, we believe that the Irish presidency was an honest broker, and to Romania, accession to the Schengen area is a priority, and we express hope that the Lithuanian presidency will intensify political efforts and appreciate the efforts made by Romania and Bulgaria and the European Union to have a favorable decision by the end of the year. Thank you.
Much. The next speaker is Mr. Luboš Blaha from Slovakia.
Ďakujem pekne. Slovensko je stabilný člen eurozóny a...
Thank you very much. Our government supports further integration in the European Union, and we support solidarity. I think that the social crisis is a huge challenge for Europe. The democratic model is under threat, and poverty is on the increase. Unilateral austerity policy is not the right solution to the problem. And this policy is counter to growth and increasing purchasing power of citizens. The citizens do not believe in Europe any longer. What do you feel? Do you feel that Europe has a chance with this austerity policy?
Speaker is Mr. Epaminondas Marias from Greece.
Θα ήθελα να ευχαριστήσω τον κύριο Πρωθυπουργό.
I would like to thank the Taoiseach for his comments and for the hospitality, of course, your hospitality here in Ireland. The issues you've raised, democratic legitimacy, are extremely important. Who decides, after all, for the destinies of people? Is it governments, national parliaments, the European Parliament? I believe that the Lisbon Treaty does cover these issues. It did initially, but now a serious issue is arising in those countries that are under the Troika and the memorandum. I imagine that the Irish Prime Minister and our friends here, Irish MPs, must have the same experience. The Troika decides on the fate of the Greek people, and they take decisions. This is a serious issue, and it's in conflict with democratic legitimacy. We need to take a position on this, because it's not possible to have Troika overturn democratic legitimacy, and most of all, we cannot allow them to break EU treaties themselves. So what is happening in practice is that the EU needs to safeguard its own functioning and isolate the Troika.
From France is Mr. Pierre Lequier.
Oui, Monsieur le Premier
Taoiseach, could I start by congratulating you on the Irish presidency? Some excellent results. But I'll be talking about the obviously the economic side of things, but also what's politically at stake, because a few months into the future there'll be the European elections, and we have to face facts. European citizens find it harder and harder to understand Europe. As we make progress, we're losing the citizens' understanding. And so in coming months, in fact, probably in coming weeks, because you are still in the presidency, you should give a message to all the presidents and prime ministers to say that we need to mobilize all the politicians, whatever their political background. to fight the growth of Euroscepticism and extremism?
Taoiseach. In respect of Romania and Bulgaria, these acceded to the European Union during the Irish presidency in 2004, and we fully support their full integration into all the mechanisms of the European Union. Ireland has been a friend of Bulgaria and Romania for many years, and have engaged with them at European Council level when they've been present. In respect of democratic accountability and the question of the citizens versus austerity, there's no doubt at all but that every citizen across the Union has been affected by all of this. I mean, every one of your countries is affected by it. But be clear on this, we joined the European Union 40 years ago, the same day as Britain. And our membership of the European Union has transformed this country by use of the various assistances over those years from being a backward, introverted, closed economy to a country that is now open, one of the most open economies in the world. Over 1,000 multinationals here, where exports are in double digits and still booming, and where our education system has changed, where we transformed the nature of the way we do business to a point where we had been doing exceptionally well. We need to change structures again because of the economic crisis. But in the middle of all of this, remember that the Irish were the only people who had to have a referendum by secret ballot on the Fiscal Stability Treaty. And that was endorsed 60-40 by the Irish people, showing clearly their view and their understanding of where our future is linked to, and that is to the Euro and the European Union. And I would say that, if you like, one of the consequences of the construction of our own constitution here is that over those 40 years, our people, under all governments, have engaged on a variety of referenda. So therefore the Irish electorate is very well versed in the distinctions between the Commission, the Parliament and the Council. In other words, the electorate here knows over the years the way that the Union is actually structured from that point of view. So we understand it. As far as the Troika is concerned, nobody wants to see a Troika come in the first place. But when they came here, I think it's a case again of building relationship and trust with them in order to explain that there are different ways of arriving at the same objectives. And we've actually been able to get the agreement of the Troika to change elements of the Memorandum of Understanding that was originally drawn up that are in the better interests of our people. Example. When the Troika came first, they said, if you sell any state assets, you must put all of that towards debt reduction. When you explain to the Troika that there are actually public infrastructure and employment potential arising from these things, they were able to agree on changes in the structure of the Memorandum of Understanding. So while they've been here, it's been very difficult. 190 decisions to be made by the government with the Troika, which are very difficult for people. Downsizing of public service, downsizing of public pay, pensions, all of these things. But it is possible to change some of these things where there's a relationship and a trust actually built up. I think it's a case of mobilizing all politicians about where our future actually is headed. And for me, Europe will continue and can continue to be a critical part of global development. But it requires decisiveness, clarity, it requires horizons against which you can plan, and it means that leaders, when they make decisions, have to have the courage to follow them through. This is an enormous challenge, particularly as you look forward to the European elections next year. Our presidency has tried to be an example of how you can limit the scepticism of what Europe can actually achieve. And we hope that our country and its people, when we emerge from this programme later this year, can be an example to any others that where you are prepared as government and people working together to roll up the sleeves, make the decisions to deal with the problem and the scale of the problem, and having dealt with adversity in the past, we do so again here now. So I've never believed, of course, you can't either tax your way to prosperity or have prosperity through continuous austerity. There has to be a balance here of getting your fiscal discipline right, but at the same time pumping what you can into opportunity to open the doors where employment can be created and where careers can follow. I don't, for any politician, at the end of the day, it is about men and women being able to go to work in the morning, to have an income, to have a career, to be able to build their lives and their families and their futures in their own countries if that's what they wish to do. And if that's not what they wish to do, that they be able to travel to other countries with the confidence and the education that will allow them to stand on any platform with their peers. I see an enormous future here for Europe, and it's all about confidence, and politicians should not be negative, should not become disillusioned, because it is about making decisions that affect the problems that we face. And these are enormous challenges, but it's one where the high ground beckons up ahead.
Thank you, Taoiseach. The next contributor is from Cyprus, Ms. Athena Kyriakitou.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, can citizens of the EU trust European institutions, or do you think they're put off by the heavy austerity measures being imposed to them? And do you really believe that the EU's budget for 2014 to 2020 is sufficient so that we can restore growth and bring back jobs? What is your vision of true solidarity among EU member states? Thank you.
The next speaker is Mr. Carlo Cassini from the European Parliament.
Thank you, Chairman. If you talk about the budget, you talk about the future. If we take a look, if we look forward to the future, you can be optimistic. With an eye on the next European elections, of course, that these elections will have a significant impact on the future of Europe. Europe got the Nobel Peace Prize for what it's done in the past. That's quite clear. What will be known for the future was outlined by President Barroso recently when he talked about a federation of nation states, when he referred to that. Here, now, today, however, as a representative of the European Parliament, I would ask for convincing guarantees under the budget. We don't want to have any more debts. We need to have a review clause for the budget for 2016. We need to establish flexibility in expenditures so that you can have carryover. And finally, we want to have a clear timetable to look at a new autonomous financing for the European budget. I'm talking about own resources. Thank you very much to the Irish Presidency.
From Belgium, Ms. Christiana Vienne.
Merci, Monsieur le Premier Ministre.
Thank you, Taoiseach. How can we strengthen the role of European and national parliamentarians, in particular in budgetary terms? Because there is less and less room for manoeuvre in political terms. Now, you have said that the austerity policy has reached and shown its limits. If we want to involve young people and European citizens, we need a vigorous policy through the Pact for Growth and Jobs. Thank you.
From Spain is Mr. Diego Lopez.
Gracias. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to ask the Taoiseach about the position that the presidency